Miami Torah Center. Thank you everyone for coming, and Chag Sameach. Just before we start, we'd like to officially invite everyone to our grand Mimuna party, which is sponsored by the Apikassis family. Thank you very much. If you haven't seen it, and those tuning in on live, look for our post. It's free entry. There's going to be plenty of food, music by DJ Wrath. So be here, and we're going to dance all together, and we're going to have a great time. Be'ezrat Hashem Yitbarach. Tonight's topic is a very interesting one. It's a very catchy, interesting tagline. We called it, "The Sea is Splitting," right in front of you. And what are you going to do about it? What's your next move? And obviously the topic is that at the end of Passover, we are going to read about the story of the splitting of the sea. So let's go back and let's understand the sequence of how the story of Passover plays out. The Jewish people come down to Egypt. There were 70 people. They ended up staying there for 210 years. The last year before they leave Egypt was a chaotic year for the Egyptian people. It was a great year for the Jews, but it was chaotic for the Egyptian people. And I say so because the 10 plagues took place. And the 10 plagues were testing not only the Jewish people's faith, but the Egyptians' faith as well, to see if they were going to let them out, they were going to heed to the word of God or not. And they were eventually asked to leave. Paro comes and he says, "Okay, take them, go!" But it didn't end there. There's more to the story, as we all know. So what we are celebrating on Passover is the Exodus. We're celebrating our freedom from Egypt. But the story doesn't end there. We know that there's another 40 years that the Jews wander in It's not working? It's good. That the Jews are wandering 40 years in the desert. But before that, the first week of their exodus, there's a lot that takes place. And that's what we're going to speak about tonight. They leave Egypt, and we think that everything is fine. But it's not. When they leave, 3 days into their journey, the Jewish people are bewildered. They're unoriented. They don't know to continue or not. They get to a sea. Now, I don't know about you, but when I am traveling somewhere and I see water in front of me, I stop. That's what the Jewish people did. They stopped, they hesitated, they paused by the word of God. Paro sent the Jewish people out, not alone. He sent them with Egyptian escorts at the same time because he didn't believe. He didn't believe that their story was true. What was the Jewish people's story? What was Moses telling Paro? That we're going to go on a 3-day journey, worship God, and come back. 3 days in, the escorts are looking at the Jews, and the Jews are hesitating. They run back to Paro and they say, "Paro, it was a big lie. It's a scheme. They just wanted to escape." So the first 3 days, they're traveling with them. It took them 1 day to run back and tell Paro. Then, days 5 and 6, Paro takes his whole army, complete army and military of Egypt. They come and they follow the Jewish people, and they come to try to chase them and try to get them back. When the Jewish people see this, they start panicking. They scream to God. God answers and says, "Continue, why'd you stop?" "Why'd we stop? There's water in front of me. Where are we going? We didn't come with rafts and paddle boats. We don't have anywhere to go." So what happens at that moment? The unforgettable, the unimaginable, something that today, when we see on a screen, we might take for granted, but in true life, it was something amazing. The sea split. We take it lightly, but it was the most fascinating. Chachamim tell us that the miracles that took place by the splitting of the sea override all of the amazing things and the 10 plagues that took place in Egypt. And each one of the 10 plagues is a whole story in and of itself. But the splitting of the sea was greater than all of that combined. It was the highlight. So at the eve of the 7th day, so 3 days they were traveling. 1 day the Egyptians went back to call the army. The army took 2 days to get back. That's a total of 6 days. At the eve of the 7th day is when the Jewish people enter the sea. The sea splits and they cross through. By the morning, they come out, they emerge. And that was the fascinating miracle and show of God's greatness by splitting the sea. If we count the days, if Pesach is the Exodus, so that means tomorrow night, which is the end of the 6th day of Passover, the eve of the 7th, is when the sea split and the Jewish people traveled all night long, and then they emerged, corresponding to this year, Friday morning. It would have been on a Friday morning, right? 7 days from Passover. The 7th day of Passover, emerged, and they then sang the famous Az Yashir Moshe, the chant of praise to God the Jewish people composed. And they all sang simultaneously with no preparation. We all know what it takes to put a symphony together, or any song to everyone to sing along. And they all, for the first time on their first run, sang along, all in purity and in praise, thanking God for all the amazing miracles that took place. And that's why we read Friday morning about the splitting of the sea. Because that's when the sea split. Exactly on the 7th day in the morning is when the sea split. That's when we read about it. Even though it's back in Exodus and Parashat Beshalach, the beginning of Parashat Beshalach. But we read it again to commemorate it on its very own day. Before we get into actually walking in or going into the sea when the sea splits, just a couple beautiful facts that our sages tell us, that God brings the Egyptians to the sea and sunk them and destroyed them in water. We all ask ourselves, but 1 second, Pharaoh was a genius. Pharaoh studied God. He studied all gods, all the false ones, but he also studied our God. He denied it, but he knew. Do you know what he did to try to annihilate the Jewish people? He tried to play by God's rules. God's rules are measure for measure. In Hebrew we say midah keneged midah. God plays by measure for measure. If you wrong another, they'll wrong you. If you're nice to another, the way it works, we call it nowadays karma, good karma, bad karma. This is a very, very old tradition that we have as Jews, that the world works in a way tit for tat. And because of that, Pharaoh studied God. Pharaoh knew this. Pharaoh tried to find a way to annihilate the Jews in a way that he cannot get punished back. How so? By throwing the Jewish babies in the water. You know why he chose throwing them in the water? Because he remembered almost 2,000 years prior that, 1,500 years prior is when the great flood came. And the great flood, God promised he would never do that again. So he thought God could never punish us again with water, so let me do something to his own children with water. But Pharaoh wasn't smart enough. Pharaoh didn't know that God's promise was only not to flood the entire world. So you know what God did? God lured them. He drew them in. He made them follow the enemies into the water, and then he just stopped the miracle. And what happens when a miracle of water splitting, God pulls back? The water just comes down crashing. I don't know about you, but if you're chasing someone, no matter what they've taken from you, and then they chase into, and then they run away into the ocean, and very, very deep, are you following them? No. Okay? Even if the sea split, even if the ocean would split and someone would go in, you're not taking your chances. No matter what they took from you, it cannot be worth more than your very life. So how did Pharaoh, not only Pharaoh, all of the Egyptians go and follow? God got them so into and so involved in what they were doing. They were angry. They were full of rage. They did something which was irrational. They followed a people. They followed the Jewish people into a place which makes no sense. And then God pulls them in that way. But now the question is, why didn't God take care of them back in Egypt? Why didn't He destroy them back in Egypt? Why did He have to wait to bring them to the sea outside of Egypt to have them destroyed? That's one question we're going to ask. Another question is, well, it's more of a parable. Let's put it this way. There was once a individual who had a severe skin condition, and the condition was that he had to go for, he didn't know how long, to the doctor. And the doctor every day would cut out some of his skin. He had a growth. And every day it was very painful for him. Day in, day out. And every day after the procedure, he looks at the doctor and the doctor says, it's only going to be one more day. We're almost done. So after a couple months, the guy's losing hope. So one day, the doctor says, today's the last day. So he looks at him and he says, every day you've been telling me tomorrow's the last day, today's the last day. How do I know it's for real? So you know what the doctor did? The doctor took his surgical knife and he broke it in front of his eyes to show the patient that that's it. Today was really the last day. When the Jewish people left Egypt, they thought they were free, but they couldn't believe it. And then, 3 days later, when the spies go back and they call, and now they're being chased after, they all thought to themselves, it's too good to be true. It's like that promise which was promised and could not be kept. So what did God do? Kind of the same way as the doctor breaking his surgical knife. God takes the Jewish people, brings them into the water, has the Egyptians follow them, and then the Egyptians are wiped out and their bodies float up to the top. God showing them, these people are never coming back after you. Never again. But why take them out here? Why couldn't God take care of them back in Egypt? So listen to a true story. This is an amazing story. It's a children's story, but we could really enjoy it ourselves as well. There was once a man who unfortunately could not make a proper livelihood. He tried from one job to another and he was struggling. So he came home to his wife and his kids and said, you know what? I think I need to go to a bigger city. And maybe there's more opportunity over there for me to find a livelihood and bring back home some money. So everyone was very sad that they had to do so, but they did. The husband goes out, and when he's abroad, he starts working for a bakery. He becomes a partner in the bakery, and he starts making a good livelihood. 2 years from the day that he left home, he already amassed a nice amount of money to bring home. So he sells out of his business and he's on his way traveling home with all of his cash. And unfortunately, what happens? A bandit finds him and sees him lugging, you want to call it gold, cash, diamonds, however he traveled. And the bandit comes armed, points the gun at him and says, give me everything you have or I'll kill you. So what does a person do in such a situation? You give everything you have. Again, our life is worth more than everything. But then, the man was clever. Listen to this. The man looks at the bandit and he says, I have a problem and you need to fix it because you're part of it. I don't care about the money. It's hard for me to part with this because I worked hard for it, but I don't care about that. But I'm going to have a real problem when I get home because my wife's not going to believe me. She's either going to think I made up the whole story or I really made the money and I blew it off at the casino or something else. So I got a real problem. You're part of it. Mr. Bandit, you're going to fix it for me. He looks at me. He looks at him and he says, what are you talking about? I don't care. I'm gone. I just hit on the jackpot. I'm out of here. He said, no, I got an idea. Take your rifle. He took off his jacket and he said, shoot a hole in my jacket so my wife believes me that an armed robber was really after me. The robber said, sure, no problem. Boom. Makes a hole. He says, but that doesn't look too good. Let's do another one. Boom. He shoots two shots in his jacket. He says, okay, let's make this real so she really believes me. He takes off his hat and he asks him to shoot the hat. He shoots his hat. He says, okay, one more. He takes off his shoe. He says, here, shoot a hole in my shoe so it really looks like I was being chased and you jumped me and you took everything I had. Shoots his shoe. He says, one more. My bag of clothes. Shoot a couple shots in there. He tries to shoot again and the guy has no more bullets. He says, I can't, I have no more bullets. He says, perfect. And then the man jumped on him, beat him to shreds, took his money back and went on his way. Although it's a great story, but it has a real lesson to us all. Chachamim tell us that the Jewish people were tortured by the Egyptians. In some way, the Egyptians had right to have the Jewish people bored in their country. When I say bored, like to spend time there. They spent time in their country because the Jewish people were set to be in exile. However, the Egyptians took a little far. They started enslaving them. They started torturing them more than they should have. But at the end of the day, after the 10th plague, after Pharaoh's own son died, you know what Pharaoh says to Moses? Take the people. He agreed. He agreed to God. He agreed to everything that happened. In one way, Pharaoh now loaded his gun with ammo and he had the upper hand. But however, 4 days later, when they set out to go chase the Jewish people, he, so to say, wasted his ammo. He wasted all of his good merit and credit he had with God by going and chasing them, because that really showed that he never truly submitted to Hashem. And because of that, at that moment is when God had to punish them. When was that? That's when they chased them at the sea. That wasn't back in Egypt. In Egypt, almost everything the Egyptians did could be justified. Almost. Not really, but almost. God was willing to let that pass because Pharaoh agreed after the 10th plague. But after Pharaoh made the decision to go and chase the Jewish people after he let them go, it, so to say, uprooted his submission to God and showed that he didn't really believe in everything that just happened. And because of that, that's when the Jewish people, that's when God drowns and completely annihilates the Egyptian people. So now the sea is split. But prior to the sea, the Midrash tells us something which we all know, but I don't think we really understand how powerful this Midrash is. The Midrash says that before the splitting of the sea, Moses comes and says, God told us to keep walking. So everyone's looking at Moses, looking at the water, looking at Moses, looking at the water, and saying, where are we going? And at that point, the tribes, the leaders of the tribes, look at each other and they have an argument. And they start arguing which one is going to be the one that's going to go in first. And everyone's backing out. Everyone's saying, you go, no, you go, no, you go. Everyone was trying to pass on the responsibility, pass on the opportunity, pass on the bravery. But there was one tribe, the tribe of Judah. Nachshon, the son of Aminadav. He gets up and he goes in first. Because of that, our sages teach us that the tribe of Judah merited to be the kings. All of our kings, David Melech Israel, comes from the tribe of Judah. kingship was given to the tribe of Judah. And this is because of what they did at the sea. You see, when we hear the word responsibility, often we tense up. We get scared. What does that mean? But the Torah views responsibility a completely different way. The Torah shows us time and time again, and this is just one example, of the tribe of Judah jumping up to the responsibility and being rewarded for it. Instead of stepping back and being passive, rather doing something about it, they were given a gift. They were raised, they acted better, and they were given now a better portion than the rest of the tribes. This was something that was given then, but this is something that can be given to all of us today as well. There are opportunities that come in our lives. Opportunities that we're able to take and not able to take. Familial opportunities, communal opportunities, business opportunities, friendship opportunities, opportunities of chesed, of doing good things. Negative opportunities as well. And we all have the choice. We all have this gift of exerting our free will and deciding what we're going to do. Are we going to make the responsible decision and say no to something which is harmful, which is negative, which is contrary to what my Creator wants from me? Or say yes to something that my God wants me to do, to take on a responsibility, to help another, to do something good for someone else? We have that choice. In our lives, we're all standing in front of a sea. And the way I want to look at it is, the sea's really always closed. It's what we make out of it. Do we slice through it? Do we open it up? And then God opens it up for us completely. That's what happened with Nachshon. Nachshon goes in, and until his nose, it was water, and then it split. Until Baal Maim ad Nafesh, until the water came till the place of his life. That means until he couldn't breathe anymore. God wants us to stand in front of our own seas and look at it and say, that's an opportunity. That's a responsibility at hand that I have. Are we going to take it or not? Now, not taking it is not the end of the world. It just means that we're not upgrading ourselves. We are not going to get that extra reward, that extra merit, compared to the tribe of Judah who was given kingship, which lasted eternally for that tribe. We all have that choice in our life to make, to take the opportunities, to take responsibility upon ourselves or not. A piece of the Talmud sheds light on this concept in a beautiful way. This is not the regular Babylonian Talmud, this is a piece of the Jerusalem Talmud. Listen to what it says. It says 3 people are granted atonement, and here are the 3. Number 1, a chacham, a wise person. Number 2, a hatan, a groom.
The king.
Number 3, a gadol, a great person. Okay? Wise person, a groom, and everyone's thinking, what about the bride? Wait. Bride doesn't ever need atonement. They're perfect, right? So, chacham, wise person. Chatan, a groom. And then a gadol, a great person. These 3 people are granted atonement. But the Talmud gives an example of a chatan, of a groom, who was given atonement. You know who it was? Out of any biblical character, this probably would have been the last one you would have thought. And you know who it was? Esav. Esav, the twin brother of Jacob, the son of Isaac. Why? Well, later on in his life, he marries multiple women. And one of the women's name was Machlah. Machlah is not a very common name. I don't know anyone who's named Machlah nowadays. I know some Arabic names, some Moroccan names are very, like Frecha, it's very similar, right? But Machlah we don't have, okay? The Talmud says that wasn't her name. You know what her name really was? A completely other name. You know why the Torah says that Esav marries a woman called Mahla? Because the word Mahla comes from the word Mehila, forgiveness. Esav, as wicked as he was granted forgiveness when he married this woman. Why? Does that make any sense? Listen to why. When a person marries someone else, and this is specifically to a groom, when a groom marries his bride, he now, not she, he now is assuming responsibility over his wife. He now has to provide. He now has to take care. He now has to do. So these three people, and specifically the groom, is granted forgiveness and atonement just for assuming responsibility over another human being. And that's how powerful assuming responsibility actually is. We all have these opportunities. We all are able to assume responsibilities for our family, for friends, for others. The question is do we jump to that occasion or not? And to that brings me to what we are celebrating in general and in specific over the holiday of Passover. In our prayer we say that this is our Zman Herutenu. It's the time of our freedom. Freedom of what? What does freedom mean to us today in 2019? What does freedom mean to us? So consider the following. Imagine, although it's not politically correct or socially acceptable nowadays, but imagine you would have a slave. And you had this slave for 3 decades. They were serving you faithfully. You loved them. So one day you come over to your slave and you say, "My dear friend, I want to grant you the gift of freedom." And you tell the slave that instead of working for me 7 days a week, you only need to work 2 hours a week. Every Sunday, I want you from noon to 2 to prepare our barbecue and to give us a good time the way you always did, but only 2 hours. Is that slave a free man or woman? The answer is no, because freedom is complete. You have to be 100% free to be considered free. They have more time on their hands now, but they're not free. By the way, that's why we have to be 100% rid of our chametz on Pesach. Because even a minute amount of chametz on Pesach shows that we have not fulfilled it completely. And that's why we go crazy cleaning and making sure to cook properly and do everything properly. Because absolutely no chametz can be found, because that alludes to our slavery. We're breaking out of that and we are becoming free again every single year on Passover. But what are we freeing ourselves from? So when we go back to Egypt, in Egypt something looked one way, but there was much more going on. Rabbi Dessler goes on to explain that even though it looked like a physical bondage, there was a spiritual slavery which was taking place in Egypt. And it was so severe that God had to take out the Jewish people very fast, right away. Every family has a different custom by the Seder, but the Moroccan custom is to sing the famous chant of Bibhilu Yatzanu Mimitzrayim. Bibhilu is an Aramaic word for Bimhirut, in a hurry. In a hurry, God pulled us out of Egypt. He pulled us out of Egypt because any moment longer would have been too late. He pulled us out. But pulled us out of what? Out of the physicality? No, it was the spirituality. We were seeping down, sinking to the lowest level of impurity in Egypt. And that's why God pulled us out. So what does God tell us to do? He tells us every year on Passover, replay this story. Relive the story of the Exodus in your own lives. But how do we do that? So you know what our sages tells us to do? They tell us eat matzah. I don't know about you, But eating matzah doesn't make me feel free. Most not. Some. Let's continue. You know what else they tell us to do? They tell us lean on your left. They tell us eat bitter herbs. They tell us spend time with your family. But how does that free us? How does that make us really feel free? And you know how that makes us feel free? That makes us feel free when we're able to connect to the concepts which are behind it. And the concept is as follows. In our lives, we sometimes are feeling like we're set back. We're feeling like we're held back from becoming the person we want to be, the spouse we want to be, the friend we want to be, the child we want to be. But something's holding us back. What's holding us back? It's that concept of us opening up and realizing that we have the free will to decide what we want to do. If the Jewish people would have understood back then that they have a choice not to have a slave mentality, not to lose faith in God. Of course, we praise the Jewish people for keeping their language, for keeping the way they dressed, for keeping their names, but that's all they had. Do you know that the Jewish people in Egypt stopped keeping Shabbat? They stopped circumcising their boys. They stopped learning Torah. Freedom is when we are able to exert our free will. Same word, free will, freedom. That's what grants it to us. When we're able to be bigger, when we're able to be mature, when we're able to rationally choose what we want to do and when we want to do it and how we want to do it. And the only way to gauge what that is by looking in our manual, looking in our life manual, the Torah that God gave us. Look into it and God will tell us. In the Torah, it tells us how to deal with anger, how to deal with depression, how to deal with familial issues, how to deal with so many things that each and every one of us combat, sometimes or often. And that is true freedom. When God grants us the opportunity to open up our eyes, look at our lives, and choose. So our message for this year's second part of Passover, on Friday morning, when you're going to listen to the reading of the opening of the sea, and then the Shirah of Az Yashir, imagine yourself. It's okay to close your eyes sometime in prayer. It's okay to connect to God sometimes in prayer. That's the point. Imagine yourself standing opposite a sea. And imagine opportunities, responsibilities to be taken deep in the sea. Look at that and say, God, help me with that. I know that there is a barrier between me and that opportunity and me and that responsibility, but I want it. Help me get there. You know, to some, the sea will split. To others, maybe you'll have a hovercraft bring you over or a speedboat. Each and every one of us, imagine your own way getting to your goals, attaining your opportunities, and taking on those responsibilities which will make us greater people, exerting our free will. Remember, this is the holiday of our freedom, Zman Cherutenu. Let's live our lives, even though we only have 7 days and 8 days here in outside of Israel, in the diaspora. We have 8 days to commemorate this freedom. But this freedom should always be lived. It should be lived 365 days of the year, every year of our life. So may we all be cognizant, may we all pay attention to this, and may we all be granted health, happiness, prosperity, and the wisdom to see our life in front of us, make the right choices, and take on those responsibilities that'll make us greater people. Thank you everyone for coming. Don't forget, huge Mimuna party. Try to carpool or walk or Uber if you can. If not, just bring your car. But please be here. Thank you for coming.
I'll bring my grandchildren too.
Good.